Blackbeard? Most people think he was just a pirate, but that's a lie. He was a calculated, walking nightmare who engineered his own demonic myth. Imagine standing on the deck of a merchant ship in 1718, looking through the thick ocean fog, and seeing a giant of a man with his massive black beard braided into pigtails with colored ribbons. Under his hat, he tucked lit cannon fuses, so thick, choking smoke constantly curled around his face like a literal demon rising from the depths of hell. The craziest part? It was all psychological warfare. There is actually no verified account of Blackbeard ever killing a single captive before his final battle. He didn't need to. The sheer terror of his image was enough to make entire crews drop their weapons and beg for mercy. At the absolute peak of his reign, he commanded the Queen Anne's Revenge, a massive 40-gun warship packed with 300 ruthless men. He once literally blockaded the entire city of Charleston for a week, holding its most prominent citizens hostage just to demand a chest of simple medicines. For 2 glorious, chaotic years, he was completely untouchable. But by November 1718, the world decided it had enough of the demon. The governor of Virginia secretly funded a targeted hunt, sending Lieutenant Maynard to track him down near Ocracoke Island. When Maynard's ships trapped him, Blackbeard didn't flinch, and he certainly didn't run. Instead, he grabbed a glass of wine, toasted his hunters, and screamed across the water, "Damnation seize my soul if I give you quarters or take any from you." With that, he unleashed a devastating cannon blast that instantly wiped out a third of Maynard's men. Believing the battle was already won, Blackbeard and his crew boarded the enemy vessel to finish the job. But it was a deadly trap. Maynard had hidden the rest of his soldiers deep below deck. They suddenly burst out, and 6 minutes of absolute, brutal chaos followed. It was a chaotic clash of steel and gunpowder. Blackbeard fought like a possessed man. He took 5 separate gunshots and 20 deep sword cuts, yet he refused to go down. Finally, a Highlander moved in from behind and slashed his neck. The very next swing took his head clean off. Maynard took that severed head and hung it from the bowsprit of his ship as a trophy. They later mounted it on a tall pole at Chesapeake Bay, where it rotted in the sun for years as a warning to others. Legend says his headless body was thrown overboard and actually swam 3 full laps around the ship before finally sinking into the dark water. Decades later, local taverns were still using his skull, lined with silver, as a drinking cup. But Blackbeard wasn't the only high seas legend whose end became a horrific public spectacle. Enter Captain Kidd. He might actually be the most famous pirate in human history. But the dark irony is that he probably wasn't a pirate at all. In 1695, King William III personally hired Kidd to hunt down pirates in the Indian Ocean. At the time, Kidd was a highly respected New York ship captain and a wealthy property owner. The royal crown literally called him trusty and well-beloved. But the voyage was a cursed disaster from day one. A third of his crew died from horrific diseases, and the survivors grew aggressive and mutinous, desperate and under extreme pressure to show results to his investors. Kidd seized a massive treasure ship called the Quedagh Merchant. He made sure to keep the official French passes, which legally proved the ship was a valid wartime target. But by the time he sailed back, the political climate in England had shifted dramatically, and the government desperately needed a scapegoat to protect their own reputations. His powerful, wealthy sponsors completely betrayed him. The governor lured him to Boston with fake promises of a full pardon, only to throw him in chains the moment he arrived. Kidd spent 2 miserable years rotting in Newgate prison. When his trial finally happened, it lasted a mere 2 days. The crucial French passes mysteriously vanished from the evidence box, and the only witnesses allowed to testify against him were his own mutinous crewmen, who were offered free pardons in exchange for lying under oath. On May 23, 1701, they dragged him to the execution docks completely drunk because someone took pity on him and gave him enough alcohol to barely stand. They placed the thick rope around his neck and dropped him, but the rope suddenly snapped, sending him crashing to the mud. The massive crowd started screaming that it was a clear sign from God, but the executioners completely ignored them, dragged him back up, and hanged him a second time. Then, they coated his corpse in thick black tar, locked it inside a tight iron cage, and hung it over the River Thames, where it rotted in the wind for 3 long years. If you think those stories are wild, you have never heard of Francois Lallinet. The Spanish literally called him the Bane of Spain, and their sailors would actively choose to sink their own ships and drown rather than surrender to him. He originally arrived in the Caribbean as a poor indentured servant, and the Spanish masters worked him half to death in the fields. The moment he escaped and became free, he swore a blood oath to return the favor tenfold. Early in his career, Spanish soldiers ambushed his crew and slaughtered every single one of them. Lalane only survived by covering himself entirely in the wet blood of his crewmates and hiding motionless among the pile of corpses until the soldiers left. Once he got his own ship, his revenge was absolute. After capturing a Spanish vessel, he personally took his blade and beheaded the entire crew one by one, leaving just a single survivor alive to carry a chilling message back to the governor: "I shall never give quarter to any Spaniard whatsoever." Lalane became a master of psychological and physical torment. He would slice pieces of flesh off his victims while looking them in the eyes, or twist thick ropes around their heads until their eyes literally popped out of their sockets. In 1667, after being ambushed near San Pedro, he captured 2 Spanish soldiers. Driven by pure rage, he drew his weapon, sliced open one man's chest, ripped his beating heart straight out of his body, and bit into it like a wild wolf. He then turned to the terrified survivor and told him he would do the exact same thing to everyone else if they didn't show him another path. But by 1669, cosmic karma finally caught up with him. His ship ran hard aground near the coast of Panama, and he was captured by the indigenous Kuna tribe. They did to him exactly what he had done to countless others. They tore his body apart, limb by limb, while he was still fully conscious, threw the pieces directly into a roaring fire, and scattered his ashes into the wind so absolutely no trace of him would ever remain on this earth. Edward Lowe was a dangerous madman, and even his own crew eventually grew terrified of his unhinged violence. In 1723, when a Portuguese captain threw 11,000 gold coins into the ocean to hide them, Lowe lost his mind. He slashed off the captain's lips, forced the bleeding man to eat them hot, and then slaughtered the entire crew. Eventually, his men couldn't take the cruelty anymore. They mutinied and left him adrift in a small boat without food or water. A French ship found him, realized his identity, and immediately sent him to the gallows to be hanged. Stede Bonnet was the exact opposite, a wealthy sugar plantation owner who inexplicably abandoned his family to buy a pirate ship. Even though he had 0 sailing experience, he became a laughingstock, got completely used by Blackbeard, and was captured after a bloody naval battle. At his execution, the gentleman pirate broke down completely, weeping and clutching a bouquet of flowers as he walked to the gallows. Black Caesar went from a powerful African chief to a feared pirate leader in the Florida Keys. He built a brutal empire and eventually joined Blackbeard's crew, where he was caught holding a lit match over the gunpowder room, ready to blow everyone sky high. He was tackled just in time and dragged to the gallows. William Fly's pirate career lasted only 3 months, but his defiant execution marked the true end of the golden age of piracy. After a violent mutiny, he was captured by his own prisoners and brought to Boston. Instead of begging for mercy, Fly smiled at the crowd, openly criticized the executioner's bad knot, and calmly adjusted the noose around his own neck. Olivier Levasseur pulled off the ultimate heist by capturing a damaged, defenseless Portuguese ship carrying 10 years of royal and religious treasure, including a massive diamond-encrusted solid gold cross. He walked away with millions, but was finally caught 9 years later. Right before he was dropped from the scaffold, he threw a mysterious coded map into the crowd and challenged anyone to find his hidden Fortuna treasure that remains lost to this day.